A little background information. From when I was a little kid, I would often have weird sleep paralysis experiences. My body would become locked up at night, but I was fully consciously aware. It scared the hell out of me at the time. I would scream to break the paralysis, to the point that my parents became very worried about me. I remember telling my dad about it at one point when I was like 5 years old. Then, when I was a teenager, I had a semi-significant experience where I was napping on a couch on a lazy, quiet afternoon, and my legs started to float above my body, but I was tethered at the head. This sparked an interest in these experiences, and when I was in college, I began to research astral projection, along with some significant drug experimentation. I was never able to achieve astral projection despite many attempts at meditation. The closest I came was some very mild vibrations on my skin. It just felt like goosebumps. I then became a physician, and through the progression of scientific medical training, chalked these experiences up to just some weird neural firing. I explained my experiences as just your typical sleep paralysis. I have also in recent years become a staunch atheist, choosing to only believe in what is tangible in this world. About a year ago, I began to experience something new though. About once a month, I would wake up from a dead sleep to a very intense vibrations and a feeling that I was rushing toward the ceiling of my room. I was also physically paralyzed. When I was a child, the paralysis terrified me. However, now that I was older, I just calmly would observe what was happening. Again, over the last year, I just thought it was a weird neural thing that happens to some people. The brain, after all, is a mystery in many ways. However, because of my previous interests in astral projection over the last year, every time I experience the vibrations and rushing, I attempt to break through. This always has resulted in me opening my physical eyes and just waking up. My skin always tingles a little bit after these experiences. Then, last night happened. This is one of the most profound experiences of my life. My girlfriend had woken up around 4 a.m. to go to work and woke me up in the process, said goodbye, and I went back to sleep. It was raining out, and I was sort of drifting in and out. I had a very clear dream that involved me fighting some sort of demon to save a bunch of people. I had godlike powers in the dream and felt very powerful. I don't think it was any different than any other normal dream. It clearly didn't feel any different. The dream ended, and I was lying in bed, semi-awake in my room, when all of a sudden I simultaneously became paralyzed and became aware that there was a woman standing in my room. It was like I was looking through squinted eyes. Remember, I was paralyzed. I was confused by sleep, and all I was thinking was why my girlfriend had come back home. The woman walked over to the side of my bed, and it was then that I realized it was not my girlfriend. I have no idea why I wasn't terrified, but I wasn't. I just stayed calm. I tried to kick her, but my foot wouldn't move. Then the vibration started. It felt the same as what I have been experiencing for the last year, except exponentially stronger. If I had to describe what I was feeling in one word, it would be electricity. As a physician, it's what I would imagine an epileptic seizure feels like. My body was supercharged, vibrating, and I felt the same rushing upward. I knew that this experience was very different than what I had felt before. It felt like I was finally getting a chance to break through. So I rolled my body, and it worked perfectly. I rolled out of my body. And I mean I was out. I was fully consciously aware of everything, but I was still semi-paralyzed. I could only see through slits in my eyes, and I watched the woman walk out of my apartment and sort of drift through the wall. I was floating around my ceiling, willing myself to burst through the roof or wall, anything. Gradually, I slowly floated back to my body. It still felt like every part of me was supercharged, though. Electricity was at my fingertips, in my brain, in my eyes. It seemed like I could feel it in the air. So I thought I'd have another go at it, and rolled out again. This time, I was more upright, and I could see my room a little better. It was sort of like I was drunk, though, like I was floating upright, but at an angle, so my head was scraping along the wall. All I could think about was how solid the wall felt. I was amazed at how concrete it was, like completely tangible. I was able to float around and observe a little more, then gradually floated to the floor, but I was propped up against my nightstand. I was lighter than air, though, so the awkward angle didn't hurt or anything. I was thinking that if I were to wake up, I would fall to the ground. I must have stayed like that for about 10 minutes, paralyzed, propped up against the nightstand with my whole body sort of floating. Then I rolled back into my body and opened my eyes. Through this entire experience, I was fully consciously aware, and it was this that has convinced me I experience for the first time something that exists outside of this three-dimensional world. The woman, the things I felt, the electricity. This wasn't a mind trick in even the slightest bit. Now, I truly am a natural skeptic, but this has blown me away. I've been giddy all day at work, like I was allowed to see behind the curtain for the slightest bit of time. I believe the woman or being that came into my bedroom helped supercharge me, if you will. And the feeling she left me with was that there is so much more to see, explore, and experience. My mother told me a few years ago that I was a weird kid, for she never had to send me to bed while I was growing up. I would always tell her when I was done for the day, and off to bed I'd go. I laughed and asked, "Do you know why?" She shook her head, so I told her the truth of the matter. My nighttime activities were far more real and exciting than being in the body during the day. When my head hit the pillow, I'd literally take off. I'd stand on the edge of the bed, launch myself out the window, and my adventures would begin. I would soar over rooftops, sometimes peering into windows, and could travel long distances in a blink of an eye. Frequently, I would land and mingle with the people I found myself amongst. Often they were speaking foreign languages which I could not understand. Usually I was alone, but occasionally was accompanied by either a cat or a dove perched on my shoulder. On one trip it was both. Sometimes I would hear the most ethereal, gorgeous music during the trips. I could see the people, but they could not see me, for I would constantly test that fact. I would board a bus and ride around the city I was in, or take a stroll through a building of interest. Mostly I love flying above the terrain and looking down at our beautiful earth. All of my senses seemed to be heightened in that state, and the music and colors were unbelievable. What frustrated me the most was my inability to stay aware of how I re-entered my body. One night, I determined to make a great effort to see how that was accomplished. I was always aware when my trip was about to end, for I'd begin to feel a drain of energy. It was like a sudden weakness or a tug drawing me back to my body. This night, I found myself losing momentum while flying over an open wooded area, and suddenly I came upon a large construction site. A huge masonry building with walls about 20 feet high, not under roof yet. I slowly settled in the unfinished interior, and my last thought was, oh nuts, now what do I do? I never succeeded in discerning how I re-entered my body, but just continued to enjoy the nighttime adventures. Years later, one evening a spiritual studies group meeting had to be aborted because of blizzard-type weather. There were only 4 of us there in lieu of the normal 20 who attended. One was a hypnotherapist, so we began an experiment. My parents were spending the winter in Florida, so our goal was for me to pay them an astral visit to see what was happening there, record my impressions at this end, then call them for verification of where they were and what they were doing at that exact time. I left my body, flying due east from Ohio to avoid the weather, and followed the east coast down to Florida. When I arrived at the parents' house, I found that my aunt and uncle were visiting them. Uncle had a cane leaned against the side of his chair. He normally didn't have one. They had just finished dinner together. Pop was watching TV. Mom was doing the dishes in the kitchen. I tried very hard to get her attention, even attempting to pull on her dish towel as she held it in her hand, but she remained unaware. In a phone call later to them, Mom verified to a T all that I saw on that trip. I gave her no clues other than asking her where they were and what they were doing on that night at the time. Turns out that Uncle Vic had sprained his ankle, and that explained the temporary cane. Apparently, there's much more to this 3-dimensional experience than meets the eye. An OBE is an out-of-body experience. So how about an OBE with similarities to a near-death experience? It is the closest explanation I can come up with to explain my event. As an adult now, I am describing something that happened to me as a kid, aged about 11. On a summer afternoon, we went shopping a short distance from our house. This was a quick event that happened before we got home. I was lying down in the back seat of my mother's car while my mother and sister talked in the front seat. I began to really wonder and say stuff to myself. I wonder what it's like to be dead. I could have momentarily shut my eyes. I don't know. Suddenly, I was in a black, empty space. I was instantly transported into this place. I remember the sunny day, thinking about death, and right as I was thinking about death, I entered the void. Total black emptiness, seemingly unending space, and it doesn't matter where you are, because it is all the same. I didn't move in this. I was just a consciousness in the void, amazed at the difference between life and death. Just everything gone. I was very worried to be there, as it seemed to be so finite. The end. No second chance. I don't want to be here. To me, I figured this meant that when I died, I could return to this place if I didn't try to give meaning to my life, and for me, the instant answer was to help others. The thoughts in my mind were very prominent in the void. The only sound being my thoughts made the void very lonely. Without distractions, you can hear yourself very well. My state of alertness and consciousness were the same as before and after the event. I didn't want to go to this void again. The emotions I went through were dismay, a feeling of abrupt and unexpected ending, and a wonder about if I were let out of this place, how could I feel good about my life if I had to arrive here again, and then fear bordering on desperation, ending with a deep willingness to go back to my day-to-day life. I came to a point where I truly wanted out of that dark place. I was back in my car, looking around, feeling very relieved. At the time, I viewed this as a real event because I was awake during the short car ride. As I was repeating the question, I entered the black void, and I kept up the patter of my own thoughts before, during, and after the experience. I remember instantly coming out of the void and being conscious of being in the back seat with a steady stream of thought. I was alert at all times. It probably took less than a minute for me to just flash into the void place. Go there, quickly contemplate the place and what to do with life if given the chance. Stay there long enough to feel stuck, and then get frightened enough to will myself out. Needless to say, I'm an environmentalist now. When I was 14 years old, I was really ill. My parents took me to the emergency room. They needed to operate immediately. I opened my eyes in the middle of surgery, and I saw lights. I heard the nurses and doctors talking. "The anesthetics didn't work. I need more." I saw the doctors carrying on, doing something in me. I heard one doctor saying, "Nurse, give me more oxygen." I turned my head to see the nurse, and this was scary. I saw the nurse taking an oxygen mask, but she didn't put it on my face. She didn't even look at me. She put the mask behind me. When I opened my eyes again, I was floating in the corner of a corridor of the hospital. I felt strange floating, but I saw my mom and dad talking to a doctor. Then she was screaming, but I couldn't hear. The doctor only shook his head with negativity, and I thought, I'm dead. I'm a spirit. I wanted to go with my mom and tell her that I loved her, but I couldn't move. Then, I felt something like a giant vacuum cleaner dragging me with absolute velocity. I could feel the air. After that, I saw the light. Small at first, but I was speeding so fast. Then I went inside the light because I didn't feel anything. I felt a sense of infinite peace. However, when I opened my eyes, I saw my mom at my side, and I realized I had come back to the real world. A lot of weird things had been going on in my life, and I had been searching for answers in more unknown places, as I had many times before. In the past couple of weeks, I've been having trouble sleeping, which wasn't abnormal at all since I was a teenager. I've read a lot about out-of-body experiences and abductions and UFOs and the sort, so I wasn't very afraid. And when these weird happenings occurred, I'd almost immediately recognize what was going on. For maybe the 10th time or so this past couple of weeks, I was hearing this strange, soft whirling sound that reminds me of locusts, and I immediately knew I was trying to have an out-of-body experience. I opened my eyes and saw a floating light that was jelly-like and changed colors a lot. Bright reds, pinks, greens, blues, and yellow, neonish, just buzzing merrily above me. It filled me with joy. It made me feel safe, so I just watched it for a while and smiled. Now, I remember reading that if you see light of some sort, to watch it, and it will help you bring you out of your body for an OBE. So, I was watching it, and at the corner of my eye, I started to see a shadow crawling, slowly standing up. I diverted my attention to the shadowy figure, and it was that of a man. The light, still in my peripheral vision, the man smiled at me. Yet he had no face, just a shadow. He made me feel even more safe though, and I have a hunch he may have been one of my spirit guides. He held out his hand, and I slowly took it, still smiling. The next thing I remember is, while still hearing that eerie, whirling sound, I'm transported back to my body, and the sound subsides, and my eyes open again. This just happened recently, and really got me spooked. I've always been able to experience lucid dreaming, but had trouble staying lucid or accomplishing tasks while in a lucid state. So I decided I would try some galantamine and choline, as it's supposed to help with lucidity. I fell asleep and set my alarm for 5 hours. I woke up and took the pills and went back to sleep. This is when things got weird. I started to drift off to sleep, but was very aware of my surroundings. I saw shadow people everywhere, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were conversing amongst themselves, but I couldn't make out any conversations. It sounded like a room full of people all talking at once. As I looked around, I could see my door. I always sleep with my door closed, and I noticed that it was now open, and this startled me. Because of the angle, I couldn't clearly see into the hallway, but I could hear over all the talking my father's voice calling to me. As it got closer, I realized it wasn't my father. Then I saw the hand of whatever it was. The hand was mutated and deformed. It looked hideous. I popped awake and sat up in my bed. It was very hard to tell if I was awake or not because I had such awareness in the previous dream. I walked downstairs and realized I was indeed awake. I was very spooked and feared falling back to sleep because of how unusual the experience was. I waited about 30 minutes and decided it was just a dream and wanted to try again. I knew the pills would still work, so I went back to my room and laid down. Before I knew it, I was flying over my city. It was dark out, still being very early in the morning. As I flew, things started getting very blurry for some reason. So in a loud, clear voice, I yelled, "Clarity now!" Everything came back into focus, and I saw a pretty blonde woman, about late 30s, sitting and looking out the window. I flew over to her and into her window. She had a curious look about her, as if she knew I was there, but I wasn't sure. She walked over and made a cup of tea and sat down to drink it at a glass table. I decided I had better go because she seemed to be uncomfortable with my presence being there. I sunk through the floor into the downstairs and walked outside through the closed door. I thought of my friend Jordan, who I hadn't seen for a long time. I decided to pay him a visit, and I was transported to his apartment. He had some girls over and was talking with them about the plans for the day. They left, and I was alone in the apartment. Now, for some reason, I was feeling very drained. I decided to lie down for a bit, and as I did, I could feel myself roll out of the dream body I was occupying. As I rolled out, I turned and looked and could see the body I was previously in, I could see the details in my face as I took a breath. I started to freak out a little because I hadn't experienced seeing my body before. As I started to get worked up, everything started shaking, and I could feel myself being pulled into that body again. I calmed down and decided to just go with it. Once I had calmed down, everything became clear again, and I could notice a significant difference in how I felt. I was full of energy and felt extremely light. I left my old dream body, and in this new body, I flew down to the street from the balcony. As I was standing there in the street, I remembered one of those things I wanted to try when lucid dreaming: time travel. I said in a clear voice, "I want to go back in time." I was in a long tunnel with a light at the end. It seemed like a wormhole mixed with a subway tunnel. I was moving very fast through this tunnel, and as I did, I looked at my hands. My hands had a text that I didn't recognize emanating from them. The letters were gold and had a brilliant light to them. Because I was distracted with my hands, I hadn't realized I had stopped moving. I was on the same street as before, but everything was different. The road was dirt, and there were people dressed in 1800s era clothing walking everywhere. The buildings were all made of wood and were 2 stories. I walked the street and no one even knew I was there. Everything was so bright and dirty. I was about to go explore this new world when I saw that the same blonde woman from before sitting in one of the windows. She was now looking right at me. I found this to be very unusual, as no one else could really see me. She motioned for me to come to her, so I flew up to her and entered through the wall. I was quite surprised when she began to talk. She said, "You are new, aren't you?" I said, "I don't know, I guess." I was a little confused by the question. She told me I needed to get rid of the text on my hands. She wanted me to hold my hands out and repeat after her. I began to put my hands out, and she started speaking some scary sounding language. It felt more like a curse than anything else, and something didn't seem right. I didn't repeat the words, and she opened one eye and looked at me in realization that I wasn't going to follow along. She opened her other eye and smiled an understanding smile. It still seemed very creepy. A glowing silhouette of a person appeared and dissipated right in front of us. She got excited and said, "Come on, let's go. We have to follow that." We both then went through the wall and floated down the street. She was floating in front of me. Remembering the authority I have in Christ, I uttered in my breath, "Show me your true form." There was no way she could have heard me, but she stopped dead in her tracks as if she knew what I had just done. She then turned around and now appeared as a deformed demon woman, and she was angry too. She flew at me and tried to attack me. I ducked down and grabbed her by the foot. I then picked her up and slammed her on the ground. Before she could get up, I returned to the body at Jordan's apartment, then to the body in my own room. At one time, I could see my room from one eye and Jordan's apartment from the other, almost like a split screen on a video game. I then shook my head really hard and sat straight up in my bed. Once again, I didn't know for sure if I was awake or not, as I had so much conscious clarity in my dream state. After a few minutes, I realized I was awake. I vowed not to play with lucid dreaming again, but the mystery still remains. I found that once I learned to hover in a deep meditative state, I would eventually attract benevolent beings. Upon waking, I would be so excited because they would teach me concepts that I could never conceive. For a year and a half, I became a regular meditator. Around 5 times, I have received positive one-to-one downloads, each experience lasting up to 20 minutes. When I read back now on my writing, I can see that the guidance I received these times was always positive and helpful on a human lifestyle level. The very last time, however, exactly 2 years ago in May, I experienced something very disturbing. Lying on my bed at home, in a Melbourne metro suburb, around 4 p.m., television on, physically relaxed and very comfortable, I began to enter the zone. Through the corner of my eye, I saw gliding into my bedroom through a slightly open door was something I can best describe as a swerving black cloak. It was gliding and bobbing as if controlled. It very quickly came toward me and hovered near the opening of my mouth as I was exhaling. As I next inhaled, it glided with the tempo of my breath and swooshed in my mouth. I nervously felt this menacing hooded being slide inside. It all happened so quickly. With my inhalation, it swiftly rode in with my breath. I knew I was being invaded. But then, exactly like a mini vacuum, when I exhaled, the entity exited through my mouth and sucked every particle of my last exhaling breath. Instantly, I was gone from the world. I awoke from a lying down position into a completely black void. No sound, no vision. I was in a state of confusion. After just a few seconds, as my comprehension evolved, I realized at that very moment I was, in effect, dead. Once this thought took hold, I was confronted with a very fast-moving reel of pictures of me and my entire life. My childhood, me today, everything. So quickly and sharply I could see all the opportunities laid out for me. These opportunities were highlighted because I hadn't beckoned them when they were in front of me during my lifetime. It was as though another set of wise, retrospective eyes were assessing the losses I had carelessly flung away from my path. Such a difficult idea to explain, but in a sense, I realized 100% that my wisdom had come too late. I started to panic at the idea of being dead. Silence of death in a thick solitary blackness was just not part of the plan I had for my life at this time. Oh, the despair and mourning I felt this time was truly a heavy feeling for me. I cried deeply. I felt haunted, gutted. Why couldn't I have seen everything so clearly when I was back in my body? Why? Did I waste myself? But I couldn't come back, and I had no one to point the finger at, no one to blame but myself. I was alone. I was finished. I knew that I could not come back. It was final. A thought consciousness surrounded me. It was communicating what I had forgotten from my life. Then I suddenly remembered. Yes, remembered. I had a purpose. Exactly what I was supposed to do here with my time. Then I awoke.